no one had thought to look before. Her mentor is Jack Horner, one of the most famous dinosaur hunters in the world. When his team found another beautifully preserved T-Rex in the remote Montana Badlands, the massive leg bone had to be broken in half for transport. Schweitzer got to test fragments from deep inside the bone.
The T-Rex bone was filled with a very unique bone tissue. When I turned it, like that, and looked down on it and saw this tissue that you can see right there in cross-section, I knew what it was.
It's called medullary tissue, and it's what female birds build up inside their bones as a source of calcium for the eggs they lay. All dinosaurs laid eggs, and it made sense to Schweitzer that female dinosaurs produced the same kind of bone tissue. It looks different from the surrounding bone, and it meant the T-Rex had to be a mother, expecting a clutch of dinosaur eggs.
It was really exciting for me. I thought there's nothing in my career that could possibly be cooler than being able to identify the first pregnant T-Rex.
No one had ever identified medullary tissue in a dinosaur bone before. But to be sure, Mary Schweitzer directed her lab assistant to soak the bone sample in an acid solution to reveal its structure so she could study it. What happened next would change the way that scientists thought about fossils forever.
As I was looking in the microscope, the medullary material was no longer hard, and what was left was this curled piece of tissue that I was using forceps to try and flatten out. And when I poked into it, it was spongy. It was flexible and soft tissue.
Flexible tissue from a 68-million-year-old dinosaur?
Blood vessels. Here they are. Transparent, hollow, pliable, flexible, branching blood vessels that contain small, round, red microstructures floating in the vessels. I said, this is not possible. Do it again. We got another piece of bone, put it in the solution, we waited 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, looked again, more blood vessels. We must have repeated that with probably 17 or 18 different fragments of bone.
As soon as Schweitzer's discovery of dinosaur soft tissue was published, people thought of one thing. Could we get a real-life Jurassic Park? No paleontologist believes we could ever get enough ancient DNA to clone a dinosaur, but could fragments of genetic material be extracted from this new tissue?
I think anything is possible. If there are blood vessels and red blood cells preserved in a dinosaur, I think it's quite possible that there will be DNA there as well.
Even without DNA, proteins from soft tissue could begin to answer real mysteries about dinosaur biology. Evidence of warm blood versus cold blood, whether the large body size of dinosaurs is linked to large cell size. The Rogers have a theory that dinosaur mass deaths in Madagascar might have been caused by water poisoned by algae. This poisoning event wouldn't show up in hard bone, but they might be able to test the theory with dinosaur blood cells.
The structure, there's a lot of structure there. If there's anything in this tissue that Mary finds that actually can trace a toxin, that would be fantastic. Things like disease, diets, things like that from soft tissues that you can't extract from hard tissue, from true fossil bone.
The hope is that the Madagascar fossils will allow Mary to find more dinosaur tissue. So, Ray and Christy gather fragments of their best preserved fossils. A few days later, the samples arrive at Schweitzer's lab at North Carolina State University. She uses the same technique that yielded soft tissue in the T-Rex bone, soaking the fragments in a mild acid that dissolves away the mineral part of the bone. But will she be able to find the same internal structures in Ray and Christy's fossils?
There's only so much you can know from looking at the outsides of bones, but when there's soft stuff inside, the possibilities become almost endless. This is a single cell.
Through photos from her microscope, Mary hits the jackpot. Pieces of biological history.
Now see, this is really cool. It's what looks like vessels connected together, transparent. And you can see right there, you can see the branch points and stuff.
The Rogers are seeing inside their collection of fossil bones as they've never seen it before. Structures that appear to be the vessels that once carried blood inside a dinosaur's body.
It's close together. There's a transparent region.
Tube with stuff inside of it.
Branching, hollow, organic material that scientists thought could never be preserved in a dinosaur fossil.
That's amazing. But this is from 65, 70 million year old bones?
It's too early for these structures to reveal details like dinosaurs dying from poisoned water. But dinosaur soft tissue opens a door that no scientist thought even existed until Schweitzer's work changed that assumption.
There's little doubt in my mind that what she has discovered are internal structures in dinosaur bone. And we may look back and say, well, this sort of approach to looking at fossil vertebrate biology has revolutionized.
Now, with seeing the evidence with your own eyes, you can understand the cause of the flood. So who would survive in a world with God's original creation versus Satan's altered creation? Who would survive in a world with human beings and gorillas and lions and bears versus giants that are 14 to 15 feet tall? Carnivore giant animals with razor-sharp teeth that does nothing but devour anything in its sight? Giants that have footprints the size of a grown man? Satan wanted nothing more to do other than destroy God's creation and replace it with his own so that he can be like God, which is what he always wanted to do. God has creation, so Satan has to have one too. But as always, he wants to rule by brute force. So dinosaurs and humans did coexist, as you saw. If not, then we should not have any fossil human skeletons or human footprints with dinosaur footprints or blood cells in T-Rex bones, but we do. Nonetheless, dinosaurs were not a part of God's original creation. That's why they were not saved in the ark. Yet we know they existed with human beings. God only wanted to preserve his own. That's why he said, get them in the ark and save them. And we know dinosaurs did not live 60 million years ago, as these scientists say. They can't even understand how in the world you can get blood cells and tissue from something that's 60 million years old. Well, because maybe it's not. But, oh, God forbid a scientist corroborates what the Bible says. Oh, hell freeze over the day that happened because of pride. Pride. But how do you explain the Loch Ness Monster? If something lives 65 million years ago, it shouldn't exist today. If red blood cells will blow your mind, how do you explain this creature? Along with this carcass that was pulled out of the water from a Japan fishing boat in 1993, I believe. Look, it's a Paleosaurus. And tell me, how did something live 60 million years ago, 50 million years ago, 20 million years ago, 10 million, whatever million years ago, how does something thrive in the ocean and still have tissue on it? And here's the temple in Cambodia. Okay? Notice that in the temple in Cambodia has carved on it a picture of a triceratops. It has a whole bunch of other creatures that it saw above it, but it has a picture of a triceratops. Now, it is remarkable to know or assume that the person who inscribed this creature on this wall had the imagination to perfectly capture a sculpture of a triceratops that didn't exist in his time period, but existed 60 or 50 or 40 million years ago. It doesn't make sense. But when you look at the Word of God, and you take out what you think to be unbelievable or unfathomable and simply see what the scriptures are saying in terms of the intention of Satan wanting to be like God in every which way, it makes sense. God created humans. Satan wanted to create an altered version of humans, to rule by force. God created animals. Satan wanted to create an altered version of animals to rule with force. You see that over and over and over again. In fact, wasn't that why he was thrown out of heaven? Because he wanted to rule by force? So again, the cause of the flood. Remember, Satan said that he wants to be like God, but Satan doesn't have the power to create life, only copy and alter. God has a kingdom. Satan made a kingdom on the fiery stone. God created mankind. Satan altered them to make his own mankind, giants. God created animals. Satan altered them to make his own animals, dinosaurs. God sent a Savior to earth, Jesus. Satan will bring a false Savior to earth, the Antichrist. And God floods the world. Now the flood was on the earth 40 days. The waters increased and lifted up the ark, and it rose high above the earth. The waters prevailed and greatly increased on the earth, and the ark moved about on the surface of the waters, and the waters prevailed exceedingly on the earth, and all the high hills under the whole heavens were covered. The water prevailed 15 cubits upward, and on the mountains were covered, and all flesh died that moved on the earth, birds and cattle and beasts, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, and every man. All in whose nostrils was the breath of the Spirit of life, all that was on dry land died. So he destroyed all living things which were on the face of the ground, both man and cattle, creeping thing and bird of the air. They were destroyed from the earth. Only Noah and those who were with him in the ark remained alive. And the waters prevailed on the earth 150 days. Notice all is mentioned twice. And all flesh died that moved on the earth, birds and cattle and beasts, and every creeping thing that creeped on the earth, and every man, non-breath of life man, mind you. Then it goes on to mention all a second time. All in whose nostrils was the breath of the Spirit of life, reference to Adam in the Garden of Eden, and all who was on dry land died. So he destroyed all living things which were on the face of the ground, both man and cattle, creeping things, birds of the air, and they were destroyed from the earth. Clearly these are two groups of creations, and notice no mention of beast in the second all. So God is saying what he's destroying, but it seems to be two categories of things that he's destroying. He's destroying, it seems like, the earth, birds, the beasts, and every man. But then he goes on to say he destroyed those with the breath of the Spirit of life. There's only one thing the Bible mentions as the God-given the breath of the Spirit of life, and that is mankind. So these other men in verse 21 is a reference to these giants. The birds, the beasts, and the creeping things were of the dinosaurs, and the remnants of whatever that was left that wasn't in the ark. Clearly, there's a distinction. So if you compare flesh that moved on the earth versus whose nostrils was the breath of the Spirit of life, all that was on dry land, compare that creeps on the earth versus living things which were on the face of the ground. Compare birds and cattle and beasts and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, and every man versus both man with the breath of the Spirit of life and cattle and creeping thing, birds of the air. So again, major differences is with man and Spirit of life breath man, birds and birds of the air, and beast is only mentioned once. And these are two separate groups being destroyed. That which was made by God, and that which was altered by Satan.
It's the same kind of bone tissue. It looks different from the surrounding bone, and it meant the T-Rex had to be a mother, expecting a clutch of dinosaur eggs.
It was really exciting for me. I thought there's nothing in my...
No one had thought to look before. Her mentor is Jack Horner, one of the most famous dinosaur hunters in the world. When his team found another beautifully preserved T-Rex in the remote Montana Badlands, the massive leg bone had to be broken.
I knew what it was.
It's called medullary tissue, and it's what female birds build up inside their bones as a source of calcium for the eggs they lay. All dinosaurs laid eggs, and it made sense to Schweitzer that female dinosaurs produced
A career that could possibly be cooler than being able to identify the first pregnant T-Rex.
No one had ever identified medullary tissue in a dinosaur bone before. But to be sure, Mary Schweitzer directed her lab assistant to soak the bone sample broken in half for transport. Schweitzer got to test fragments from deep inside the bone.
The T-Rex bone was filled with a very unique bone tissue. When I turned it, like that, looked down on it, saw this tissue that you can see right there in cross-section.